Sitemaps. As well as designers like to show off to other people, just to prove that we're also capable of doing complicated things. It's not complicated. What's up everybody? Welcome to another one. My name is Ari, I'm a product designer and developer consultant based in Sydney, Australia. Let's unpack sitemaps. There are a lot of things that we need to cover in order to explain sitemaps. Like what a sitemap is, why should it exist, when is it required, what to include in a sitemap, and then at the very end, a very quick sitemap tutorial on how to build an actual sitemap. As usual, I've included a timestamp down below, so feel free to jump to the chapter that's actually good for you, or feel free to just sit back, enjoy, and watch the whole thing. Let's start with what is a sitemap. It's how people navigate your website, app, or platform. Just like how a blueprint or a floor plan, depending on where you're from, gives us a high-level view of the actual structure, sitemap does the same thing with your website, app, or platform. It showcases the unique name of each section, the hierarchy and the relationship of each section, and at what level each section lives, how a user moves through each section, and a high-level user flow. We can also include more things like the type of the page, high-level view of the components that would live on each page in order to get a better understanding of both macro information architecture and the micro information architecture. And it also helps us to understand what pages exist for reference and better management. Let's also not confuse a sitemap with an actual information architecture. A sitemap is just a piece of an information architecture. More on that in a later video. So why should a sitemap exist? It helps us to get a better understanding of the size of our platform. It gives us a high-level view of what pages we need to build or design, which pages are related and can share the same templates, makes us to think about the user's movements and flow within the app or the website, guides the flow a user goes through in order to discover specific information, and it could also be useful in order to map out some high-level components on each page to give us an understanding of the complexity of each section as well. So when is a sitemap required? Well, honestly, with smaller projects, you could probably get away without really building one, since the entire complexity of the sitemap is only on one level, maybe two levels if it gets more complicated. So what I'm talking about over here are information websites that include maybe 5 to 10 pages, as the relationship between the pages are fairly obvious. However, I would say that every medium to large project can absolutely benefit from having a sitemap on board. Cool, now the fun part, what to include in a sitemap. You want to include things like the page name, the level of the page, the type of the page, the flow between the pages, maybe a high-level view of the page components and the page structures, and potentially tiny little keys on the side to explain what every single thing on your sitemap is. You see, the idea over here is to be able to look at the sitemap and very quickly understand what is going on. Things like how the website flows, what is the relationship between each section, and maybe a little bit more information depending on what you include in there. With all of that out of the way, let's take a look at how to create a sitemap in 10 simple steps. Later on, I'm going to include the example in a tutorial. I'm going to showcase an e-commerce platform, as I think that most of us would really understand what that is, since most of us would have used an online shopping thing like an Amazon or something else. Let's imagine that our client is a furniture store and they've approached us in order to improve their website experience by redoing their architecture. Where do we start? Well, every single project is different depending on the amount of information that you have on hand and the amount of information that you need to find out. But a typical project runs something like this. If there is an existing website, I usually stop with a heuristic evaluation. This is where I would go through the website, look at how it's currently experienced by a typical user. I would also try and collect as much assets and information that the client currently has on hand. Since this is a heuristic evaluation for a sitemap specifically, I would start by evaluating the current flow of information and map out how the customer would really move around the website and note down any issues that I come across. This can be in a simple form of a document or a spreadsheet. It doesn't have to be anything fancy at this point yet. Also, if this is a brand new website, obviously there is nothing to evaluate, so I would go straight to step number 2, which is content auditing. This is where you want to go through and audit every single thing that lives on the website, like about pages, blog pages, article pages, contact pages, different product pages, FAQs, and every single other thing that you come across. This step is very crucial to get a grasp of the overall size of the project and how we might want to go ahead and approach this project. Again, a simple spreadsheet or a Word doc will do at this stage too. Nothing fancy is required. After we've done our auditing, we can move on to step number 3, which is data analysis. If our client has access to any data, we want to know about it. And if you do get access to data, you want to look at things like page traffics, time of the traffic, customer demographics, drop-off rates at each section, and anything else that you think might be useful in your case. Any data that you can get your hands on will help you out greatly later down the road, as you can understand the customers, what you want to flow a little bit further further up and what you want to flow a little bit further down, and so much more. Usually most places have access to Google Analytics, but ask for other stuff that they might have access to as well, something like Mixpanel or any other data that you can get your hands on. Once you're done with data, let's move on to step number 4, competitor analysis. Probably the most important step of any project. If you were to skip any of the steps above, I wouldn't really skip this one. There is so much we can learn just by looking at what competitors are doing. But in this section, not only we want to understand what our competitors are doing, but we really want to get a good grasp of why they're doing it as well. So a bit of an investigation there might be required. We want to understand what they're doing better than us, what they're doing worse, what the current opportunities are. Can we catch up on what they're doing better? Can we even improve it a little bit further? What is their customer experience like? How do their customers move around the website? And maybe lastly, how could we differentiate ourselves and make our platform better than theirs? A simple spreadsheet over here will do as well. Nothing fancy is required. Once you get the competitor analysis under control, you want to move on to personas. Whether the company already has personas or we need to create one from scratch, understanding our customers is super important in order to create anything. We really want to get a grasp of who our customers are, their demographics, what are we selling to them, why should they buy from us, what should we prioritize to them in terms of content and flow, and more. Again, it's a broken record, but a simple Word document or a spreadsheet will do. Nothing fancy is required. With the personas out of the way, step number 6, sketch different flows and ideas. With all the information that we've gathered thus far, we're really ready to start sketching some ideas on pen and paper. Sketching is a super great tool in any concepting stage of any design process. Since it doesn't really take long to create sketches and it doesn't necessarily need to look great, we could get some very quick concepts down and out of the way without really getting attached to our ideas. Step number 8, let's talk tools. Once you get your sketches and concepts out of the way, it's time to create an actual sitemap. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what you use at this point to create it. It could be post-it notes, it could be pen and paper, or it could simply be an app. Use something that you're most comfortable with and one that suits your work style. I've used a lot of different apps in the past. Miro, Figma, Illustrator, SlickPlan, Sketch, or Adobe XD. And they all do a great job at creating a simple sitemap. However, my current workflow is more like this. If I need to collaborate with my team in a workshop, then Miro is my go-to. If I need to put together something quick just to grasp on an idea, then SlickPlan is my go-to. If I'm finalizing the sitemap to hand it over to a client, then I would probably go to Figma or Illustrator to create something that looks better. All I'm trying to say is that use something that suits your situation better. However, I will leave a link down below for every single tool that I just mentioned above, if you want to check any of them out for yourself. Step number 9, validate. After you've created your sitemap, the very final part is validation and iteration. We really want to make sure that our customers understand the sitemap and the flow as well as we do. And depending on the situation, there are quite a few different ways that we can test and validate our sitemaps. A few of those things are cart sorting, tree testing, A/B testing, or maybe even user testing, just to name a few. I will create tutorials and videos about everything that I just mentioned above. So go ahead and subscribe so you don't really miss out on that content. Now, with all the theory out of the way, it's time for step 10, which is creating the actual sitemap. For that, let's go to the computer. Hello, and welcome to the computer. This is where I'm going to take you through my process in order to create the sitemap, and it's a step-by-step tutorial. I'm going to be using 2 different tools over here. One is going to be Google Sheets, which is a high-level map of everything that I've just audited, and then the other one's going to be Miro, which is this guy over here, and that is a tool that we're going to be creating the sitemap in. Let's start with the Google Sheets. From all the research that we just went through and gathered, I would have created a sheet like this, which includes everything from different products for our store, different types of pages, and different types of requirements. And I've done this by color coding the different sections, which I will explain them in a moment. We can do our best with the help of our stakeholders and our research to put a sheet like this together. However, at this point, it's still just an educated hypothesis at best, and it will require further analysis and research going forward. But it's always good to have a visual starting point like this. Now let's talk about Miro. Why do I use Miro? Well, there are a couple of different reasons. For starters, if I use something like Google Sheets, I could very simply go in here and I could select everything in this row. I'm going to do it all the way to our stories, copy it, paste it over here, And as you can see, it very simply just pastes the cards as tiny little post-it notes. And I'm going to do the rest with the rest of the list. By the way, I'm doing this because it can only handle a certain number of items and I just don't want to risk missing out on them. And there you go, here's a block. And at this point, you could very simply just categorize them exactly how you have them up here. Now, the different colors that I have, I did this on purpose. So for me, a gray would represent organizational labels. So this is the top hierarchy of all the items that I have. The yellows are specific list or category pages. The greens are detailed landing pages. The purples are authenticated pages, so pages that people need to log in. And the blues are the functional pages, which I'll come back to in a second. But from here, what I would usually do, I just go around and lay this out in a way where it's a little bit easier to read. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and I'm going to fast forward through this so you don't have to watch me do this one by one. Alright, now we've laid everything out like this, and we can start looking at this in a way that it makes a little bit more sense. Everything's already categorized for us. We know where our sections and categories are. We know how pages kind of flow together, but not exactly. But the idea is to just lay everything down and just realize at a very, very high level where our sitemap might be going. If you've never used Miro before, here's a couple of reasons why I've recently started using it for creating sitemaps. It has great collaboration capabilities, so I could simply just go over here and invite different team members that I want to have access to this board, and we could collaborate together, or share it with anyone within the company or with my clients or so on and so forth. It gives you access to these tools that you're kind of familiar with from if you've ever used a different type of design tools like Figma or Sketch or anything else. It gives you access to some pre-built templates over here. It's text, as text is usually done, so you could, resize this or, size it back down. You have access to post-it notes, of course, and there are different colors of them. You have access to all of these shapes, which is what we're going to use mostly for the sitemaps, which we'll come back to in a sec. We've got arrows that you could potentially connect different items together, which again, we'll come back to this in a sec as well. You've got these pen tools and these other drawing options over here if you want to collaborate or draw on your board. I'm going to delete the stuff that I don't need. We have commenting capabilities, so people can very easily comment on things. And you could even paste different frames exactly like your typical design tools if you wanted to do something like wireframing or user journeys or user flows or anything like that. With all of that out of the way, let's go through some of the basics. Shapes. So as I mentioned, this is probably going to be our best friend over here for the sitemaps. You can very simply draw a shape. You can type stuff in it. Hello world. You could use this bar at the top. As you can see, it appears. You could use this to modify the way that your shape works. So I could reduce the text. I could increase the size of the text. I could add a custom number in there. I could come over here and control the way that the borders work, so the thickness and everything. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see all the changes a little bit better. You can add different opacities to it. You can change the shape into dash or dot types of outlines. You could change the color. You could add a custom color. If you click on it again, you can do other things like change the text type to bold, italic, or whatever you want it to be. Change the text color, give your text a highlight like this if you wanted to, or you could even go over here and give your shape a background of a color of your choice, so like white. This little guy over here basically acts as a right click like this, so you have all of these different options available to you, and as you can see to its right hand side, you have all of these different shortcuts available to you as well. So if I was to go Command C and Command D, I can very simply just paste another card right next to it. Connections is another thing that I really love about Miro. So I can simply click on this card and see these tiny little circles. I could just click and drag one of these and it very simply connects this card to the other, and it can control how these arrows would look like by clicking over here. So I could choose none, or I could just choose a type of arrow that I like. I could mess around with the colors of that arrow, even the type of the arrow, which I'll go through in a sec. So for example, let's say that my card was down here and you can see the arrow is this smooth whoosh that goes from top to the bottom. But if I wanted to change that behavior, I would simply click over here. I can change the thickness. I can very simply change it into a hard edged arrow with straight angles. I can even change the type of the arrow that I have. So it gives you all of these tools that it allows you to very simply and quickly create these sitemaps. And the other cool thing is that this arrow now follows my card around. Cool, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and delete these guys and start from scratch. So starting from here, I just want to explain that there is no single approach to creating a sitemap, but the more you make them, the more you realize what items would suit your specific project and need. With my one, for example, I only want to showcase high-level pages, so I'm not really going to include specific components that live on each page. So for example, I'm not going to go home also includes a carousel at the top. I want to simply showcase how a user would move around these different pages, and I want to showcase the type of the pages that I've created, hence these different color codes, which I'm going to explain in just a second. So with that in mind, let's just go to this side and let's start with the nodes. I'm going to start with a simple rectangle, and I'm going to change this to full opacity. For now, I'm just going to change the border color or the outline color to this gray over here, and I'm going to decrease the size of that border as well. Maybe we'll make the border just a little bit thicker like this, just so that we can see it better. And within this, all I'm going to do at the moment, I'm just going to double click and type in landing page. I'm going to make sure that I'm on size 14 because that's the size that I like for this very specific project. I also know that I'm going to need pages like the for referral pages or other error pages that don't necessarily live within the sitemap ecosystem. And in order to do that, I will simply just click on this card and just go Command C to copy this card and then Command V to paste it. And now I have a duplicate of this. The way that I want to represent pages that live off the ecosystem, I'm going to show them with dashed lines. So I'm going to go to the outline options over here and change these to dashed lines. And I'm going to rename these to landing page off map. I also know that some pages like the checkout will have multiple steps, which I don't necessarily need to show every single step on the sitemap. So the way that I'm going to represent that is to copy the landing page. Another way that you could copy, by the way, is to just very simply on a Mac hold down the Option key and just drag, and it creates a copy for you. The way that I'm going to showcase multi-pages or stacked pages is I'm going to rename this one to, and then I'm going to go Command C, Command V. I'm going to delete what's inside here, and I'm going to drag it on top, right click, and find send to back. And then I'm going to move this guy 5 pixels to the top, 5 pixels to the right, and I'm going to repeat the same thing again. So I'm going to go Command C, Command V, send this guy all the way to the back, and repeat the same process, but from here. And just like that, I have this thing that represents stacked pages for me. But if I go ahead and move this around, the rest of these guys won't move around with it. So I can simply fix that by holding the Shift key on my keyboard and drag my mouse around all of these options to select all of them, and either just go group all of these items by clicking this button over here, or just go Command G on my keyboard in order to group all of them together. And there you go. You can ungroup them by going Command Shift G or by simply selecting ungrouped objects up here. Cool, we've got two things out of the way. The next thing that I really want to do is to create a decision indicator for when an action or input from the user is required in order to proceed. So I'll do that by creating a shape, but this time I'm going to represent decisions by using a rhombus. I'm going to make it slightly wider and slightly taller maybe, just so that we could fit more stuff in here, because it's a bit of an awkward shape to type in. But I wanted to show you guys another thing over here. Because these decision items usually live off the ecosystem of the sitemap, I want to showcase that with a similar visual language as this guy with a dashed outline. I could simply do that by clicking over here and changing this to a dash outline, but I wanted to show you guys one more thing because we're going to be using this a lot, and that's just to go right click, copy style, or just simply click on Command Option and C, which I'll do that, Command Option and C, and I could go over here and just go right click, paste style, or just go Command Option and V. And just like that, you get the exact same treatment on this card now. I'm going to make it a little bit taller, and I'm going to type in decision. The final thing that I want to introduce are categories. I want to represent categories with another single rectangle, just like this. It's going to be shorter than the others, and you'll see why in a second. And with this treatment, I wanted to give it solid lines, but I want to change the background color so that we don't really get confused with the rest of the pages, because these are not functional pages. These are just a representation of the categories. So I'm going to go ahead and click over here and just type in organization labels. We've got all the basic elements out of the way. Next, we need to come back to all the different cards that we have over here and talk about the different colors. So, as mentioned before, I knew that I need category or list landing cards, and I represented those with a yellow color. This represents a landing page that groups a bunch of components together, like home pages, category pages, blog list pages, about pages, or anything else like that. I then needed detail pages. So this represents an exclusive landing page, like a specific product page, or a specific blog detail page. I also needed authenticated pages like an account page, but I wanted to indicate that you really need to be signed in order to access these items over here. Then I wanted to showcase functional cards, and these are pages that serve a function and don't need to be connected to the CMS for a CMS user to be able to modify them. So these could potentially include things like the cart page, the checkout steps, the confirmation page, the search widget, anything like that that's really high-level engineering functional piece. And finally, we got the organization labels. This is used basically just to group elements around, and they have no real functional aspect to them. And that's why I really wanted to represent these to look very different to everything else. Now, with all of this information, I also need other people to understand what I'm talking about. So this is where a sitemap key comes in very handy. And the way that I create keys is usually really, really simple. What I'll do, I'm just going to move these guys across over here to start creating the sitemap. I usually just grab one of these guys, I delete what's inside there, and I make it into a small tiny little square, or a squarish shape, just tall enough that it's legible and understandable. And I'm going to replicate the different colors that I had over here. So as we talked about, we've got the gray, the yellow, the green, the blue, and the purple. So let's go ahead and create this into 5 different rectangles. By the way, I'm just pressing Ctrl D on my keyboard, and that just simply duplicates this item for me. And then I'm going to go over here to text and start typing organization labels. This one's going to be my details page. This one's going to be my category or list page. This one's going to represent my authenticated pages. And the final one is going to represent a functional component or page. And then I'm going to color code these as well. So the first one I'm going to keep gray as an outline, but then I'm going to give it a gray background as well. So this directly represents this guy over here. The details page, obviously, as we mentioned before, the detail pages are in green. So I'm going to color those in green. I'm going to choose this. For the categories, I've chosen yellow, so I'll do the same here, yellow orangey. For the authenticated pages, as we talked about, this is going to be the purple color. And for the functional pages, we're going to go with blue. And I'm going to group these together as well by just selecting them and just pressing Command G in order to be able to move them around a lot easier as well. You can clean them up a little bit if you want. And I'm just going to use this to type in keys and make it bold and make it a little bit bigger so we could read it easier. So now this represents the key for all of our different pages on the sitemap that we're going to create. Now the question is, how do we start creating the sitemap? Well, based on the sheets that we had before, as I said, we started grouping them together. And the idea of a sitemap is to just start putting all of these cards in a way that the flow makes the most sense. So starting with the highest category of things, we've got the homepage, right? And the homepage is simply just a detailed page. So I'm going to grab this, I'm going to hold Option and drag, and that creates a copy of that. I'm going to call this homepage, and I'm going to click into this square over here and just go copy style, but I'm going to use a shortcut from here onwards. But I'm just going to do the first one with just a right click so you guys can see what I'm doing, and paste style. And very simply, I now have the exact same style as that. So the homepage, that's what we start with, and that's a detail page. If we look at our map over here, then we have these different high-level organizational labels. So I'm going to lay these out in a way that makes sense. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to copy this, drag it down here. On the left-hand side, because I know that shop is probably going to be the biggest area, I'm going to drag it over here. And for now, I'm just going to make it this long, and we could adjust this as we go on. I'm going to make another copy of this, and I'm going to create about, make it a little bit shorter, probably as short as these cards right there. I'm going to delete that for now. And then I'm going to copy this again. I could very simply just do that by pressing Command D on my keyboard. The next one for me is going to be the blog. Again, we could change the hierarchy as we see fit. Help, account, can't type today. And we got legal. And at the very bottom, this is where I'm going to keep everything that doesn't necessarily connect to the main sitemap ecosystem. And I'm going to call this miscellaneous. And we might make this just a little bit longer. And we've got the high-level organizational labels. I also know that my homepage is going to connect to these guys. So as I mentioned before, the way that you do this on Miro is to simply just indicate where these 4 dots are and start connecting these guys together. I'm just going to change the type to a solid line like this. And I'm going to connect to all of these different pages individually. So I'm going to click there again and connect to blog and do the same with the rest. I use the arrow to indicate that from this page, I have actual access via some sort of a link, either on the page or the navigation, to these other pages over here. As I said, the cool thing about Miro is that as I resize these, the lines and everything follows through. So it makes life so much easier. I'm going to select all of these as well, and I'm just going to move them here. Awesome. Now, next, I want to start indicating what my high-level category pages are, right? So I'm going to start with shop, and we're going to go back over here. We know that underneath shop, we have beds and mattresses. As a high level, we got seating, and I believe we have, these are in the wrong place. Let me just move this up. Beds and mattresses, we got seating, we got desks and tables, and we got organizations. So I'm just gonna start with this, just copy the text within and just come over here, grab myself one of these again, and just type in beds and mattresses within. Nice. I'm going to copy this again, and this time I'm going to call this one seating. I'm going to copy this again, and I'm going to call this one desks and tables. I'm going to copy this again, and I'm going to repeat that and call this one organization. Perfect. Now, there is no connection between the shop to these because the shop just indicates the overall group category of all of these items. For now, I'm just going to make them equally distanced apart, and I'm just going to pull them up a little bit just to keep this entire thing a little bit cleaner. By the way, you do have access to alignment tools like this, so you could just align everything to the left or to the right, or however that you do it on your typical design tool. Now, past this point, I know that all of these are category pages. So once again, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to copy this style. I'm going to select all of my cards, and I just go paste style, and I have the right type of the card now. Further down, again, going back to either the Google Sheets over here or the cards on the other side, I know that I have underneath beds and mattresses, I have mattresses. I'm going to create this, and I've got bed bases, and I've got bedding. Perfect. Oops. I'm just going to select these and make sure that they're equally distanced apart, and I'm going to throw all of them underneath this guy over here. Perfect. And I'm going to connect to them from here, right? So the same type of a connection. I do want the arrow on because that's how you get access to each of these pages via that category page. And these are still category pages at this point because they're going to represent all the different types of mattresses and everything that we have. So if I go back to the cards over here and go underneath mattresses, you can see that we got original, hybrid, technical, so on and so forth. So I'm going to just copy these three just so that I don't have to go back and forth between these guys, paste them over here, and I'm going to again copy this, but this time I'm going to make it into a detail page because these are detailed product pages at this point. And I know that this is the original mattress, got ourselves the hybrid, got ourselves the technical, perfect. And I'm just going to connect through these pages. However, at this point, from the mattress to these pages, it is going to be an arrow because that's how you get access to these pages, but I'm not going to use an arrow because you don't need to go to the original in order to get to hybrid. So I'm going to get rid of the arrow and just use none. And this simply indicates that these pages are all grouped underneath the same thing. I'm just going to move them up a bit just to make it look a little bit nicer. And then I'm going to copy these across as all of these categories have 3 different items on their end. Perfect. So with the mattresses, beds and mattresses out of the way, I'm going to just select all of these guys, move them a little bit to the left. I'm going to move my keys to the left a little bit as well and increase the size of this guy just so that it covers the whole area. And then we're going to go into seatings. Now, my seating structure is very similar to my mattress structure. So I'm going to copy all of these across. Cool. Now, to save time for you not having to watch me do all of these individually, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward this portion of the video just so that I could get the whole sitemap together, and I'll come back and explain the whole thing to you guys in just a second. So you can see that our sitemap is almost done. However, we don't really have a connection to the checkouts. But before we move on, let me just explain what's going on over here. So as I said, we got the organization labels that indicates, all right, this is the shop section of the website, and that's how you move around the shop section. Then you got the about, then you got your blog, you got your help. As I said, all of these are authenticated pages, so I'm indicating those with a purple. Remember, if we go back over here, authenticated pages are represented with a purple color. And then we've got our legal and terms and conditions. And as I mentioned before, items that don't necessarily belong onto a specific page. So in this case, our functional component, which is a search engine, or other error pages or 404 pages, they live onto the website. I still want to make sure that I account for them, but they don't necessarily need to live within the ecosystem of the sitemap. So I usually just chuck them down here away from everything, just so that we know that they exist, but we don't need to deal with them as a part of an ecosystem. The checkout is an interesting one. There are, of course, many different ways in order to indicate where the checkout goes. But in my case, what I'm going to do, just like everything else, I'm going to grab a organizational label and I'm going to chuck it underneath this. I'm going to center it to that guy at the top, just like this, to move it a little bit further down. And the idea is that you could check out via any of these pages. And the way that I want to represent that is to very simply start connecting all of these pages into this organization label. So let me just go ahead and do that. I'm going to fast forward this so you guys don't have to sit through this. Perfect. So everything feeds into the checkout label. And then from the checkout label, you basically land on the cart page, then you go through the checkout steps and you get your confirmation. However, we also have an account page over here. So the way that I'm going to represent those is that I'm going to create a normal cart page, grab a copy of this, chuck it down here. Cart page for me is a component, is a functional component, so I'm going to indicate it that way. But then there's a decision to be made over here by the end user to see if they want to sign in or sign up, or they just want to continue. So what I'll do, I'll grab my decision rhombus and I'm going to paste it over here. I'm going to make sure that it uses the same color because it's a functional piece. And I'm just going to connect to it from here like this. And this is a back and forth situation. So I'm going to add the other end of the label. I'm just going to rename this to optional, which is important to include the optional factor to it, sign in or sign up. And from here again, so I'm going to go up because of the fact that I know that my checkout is a multiple step experience. I'm just going to copy the style, paste the style over here so they have the same style, and then I'm going to indicate to it that way. I'm going to get rid of the arrow from the top piece and then post this. The final piece over here is going to be the confirmation page, just like that. And that's how I would represent the checkout steps. So I'm just going to go through this one more time. You land onto the homepage, you get to the shops category, you can go through your categories, you have access to your detailed pages, you can very simply check out that way. And at the very bottom, you have your search engine for pages and other error pages. And on the right hand side, you have the rest of the website. All right, that is Sitemaps for you. You can let me know if you want me to do this on a different tool. You can also just let me know what tool you use in order to do this as well. I'm actually interested to know. And hope this video was helpful to you guys. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share, as all of those actions would help me out greatly. And I'll see you guys in the next one.